The heavy steel ramp of the armored troop carrier drops, and the grunts of the 9th Infantry Division spill out into the heat. They don't charge so much as they trudge, weighted down by M60 machine guns and belts of ammunition draped like heavy scarves over their sweat-soaked fatigues. Fort Riley, Kansas, where the 9th Infantry Division had spent the previous year getting ready for Vietnam, sat on the high plains. Now here they were in Dinh Thuong Province, and the ground itself was trying to kill them before the Viet Cong even got involved. Major General George S. Eckhart had brought 5,000 old reliables ashore at Vung Tau on December 19, 1966. Westmoreland himself came down to meet them. The 9th was the first American infantry division built from scratch for Vietnam, stood up at Fort Riley on February 1, 1966, given less than a year to organize, train, and ship out. And the Army sent them to the one place in South Vietnam no other American division wanted to go, the Mekong Delta, 15,000 square miles of rivers, canals, swamps, and flooded paddies stretching from Saigon south to the Ca Mau Peninsula. The VC had owned it for years. 28 VC battalions and 69 separate companies operated down there. Roughly 82,000 fighters moving through a network of waterways that American maps could barely keep up with. Consider the terrain for a second. Virtually every piece of ground in the northern delta sat under several inches of water for most of the year. Roads were scarce and usually mined. The nipa palm that lined the canals was so dense you couldn't see 10 feet into it. And underneath that canopy, the VC had built bunker complexes that ran for hundreds of meters along the waterlines, with fighting positions angled to cover every approach. A conventional infantry division trained to maneuver on solid ground had no playbook for this. The first months were brutal learning. In mid-January 1967, the division's 3rd Brigade headquarters and 360 occupied Camp Dong Tam, 5 miles west of Mai Tho on a branch of the river. The base itself had to be invented. There wasn't enough dry land to put it on. Army engineers and Navy Seabees dredged 600 acres of swampland from the bottom of the Mekong to create the site. Cost close to $8 million just to make a place to sleep. The VC tried to sink the dredge ship Jamaica Bay on January 9th, killing 3 crewmen. They understood what was coming. First significant contact came on January 20th during Operation Colby. Elements of the 1st and 3rd Brigades, along with the 3rd Squadron, 5th Cavalry, killed 14 VC. The scale of what they were up against made that number feel almost meaningless, but every firefight taught them something about how the Delta worked, how the enemy used the water and the vegetation, how your standard infantry tactics fell apart when the terrain wouldn't cooperate. Here's what the 9th Division had to figure out, and fast. You couldn't just hump through the Delta the way you'd patrol the Central Highlands or the coastal lowlands. The mud would take your boots, the water would rot your feet, the canals would stop you cold. And the VC knew every shortcut, every crossing point, every canal intersection where an ambush would pin you against open water with no cover. The old reliables needed a completely different way to fight, so they built one, piece by piece, from the spring of 1967 through the end of 1969. What they came up with was one of the most comprehensive tactical adaptations of the entire war. The first big answer was the mobile Riverine force. The concept came straight from the French experience in the First Indochina War. The Dinosaurs, naval assault divisions that combined boats and infantry on the rivers. MacAV published a study in March 1966 called the Mekong Delta Mobile Afloat Force Concept and Requirements, and the plan called for pairing a brigade of Army infantry with Navy river assault squadrons. The ground combat element would have been a natural fit for the Marines, but every Marine in Vietnam was committed to I Corps up north. The job went to the 9th Division's 2nd Brigade. On June 1, 1967, the mobile Riverine force went operational. Navy Task Force 117 provided the boats. Armored troop carriers, the Tangos, converted World War II landing craft now fitted with steel plating and machine gun tubs. Monitors carrying 40mm cannon and 81mm mortars. Assault support patrol boats for minesweeping. Command boats, Zippos, which were ATCs fitted with flamethrowers. The whole fleet could lift the combat elements of a reinforced infantry battalion and deliver them anywhere the waterways could reach. The troops lived on barrack ships, the APBs Benoit and Colleton, anchored in the river. The floating base could relocate on short notice, which meant the VC could never predict where the next strike was coming from. They called them Westmoreland's Wanderers, and the name fit. One day the anchorage sat near Maitho. The next it might be 60 miles upriver near Sardek, or down in Cantho. Operation Coronado 1 kicked off in June, securing the Chogao Canal in Din Tuong and Kien Ho provinces. On the first run upriver, ATC 112-3, acting as a minesweeper, hit a mine under its stern and had to be towed back to Dongtan. First successful mining of an MRF boat. The VC were adapting already. But the Coronado series, running from June 1967 through July 1968, proved the concept. In the first major engagement, June 19 through 22, MRF units trapped 3 VC companies about 15 miles south of Saigon, along the Rakch Nui Canal. 256 VC killed. That was a different number than 14. And it wasn't a fluke. The MRF's ability to appear without warning on any stretch of river in the Delta gave the 2nd Brigade something no other American unit in 4 Corps possessed: operational surprise against an enemy who'd had the initiative for years. The afloat force could only make 6 to 10 knots, which gave the VC some warning that an operation was underway. But the direction and destination remained unpredictable. A typical operation lasted 2 to 4 days. The Tangos would push into a canal. Troops would debark on both banks, sweep toward a known or suspected bunker complex, and the boats would reposition to blocking stations on nearby waterways. The 3rd Battalion, 34th Field Artillery, meanwhile, experimented with something nobody had tried before. They requested 6 artillery barges, built at Cam Ranh Bay, each capable of carrying 2 105mm howitzers and up to 1,500 rounds, towed into position by LCM-8 landing craft. These floating batteries would move at night and anchor offshore to deliver fire support at first light. When the shooting started, the grunts had artillery that had traveled with them on the water instead of being tied to a fixed firebase miles away. The VC adjusted. They figured out the drafts of the different boat types and set up positions along streams too shallow for the Navy to navigate, making it nearly impossible for the assault force to complete an encirclement from the water alone. They timed ambushes for the narrow canal stretches where the boats had to slow down, recoilless rifles and B-40 rockets from covered positions along the banks. During Coronado 5, 18 Riverine boats took hits from rockets, grenades, and recoilless rifle fire. None sank, which said something about the armor, but it also said something about how quickly the enemy was learning. On December 4, 1967, the VC triggered an ambush against River Assault Division 112 on the Rhone Canal northeast of Sardek, but the river sailors fought through the kill zone, landed troops on the enemy's flank, and turned the ambush inside out. Other American and Vietnamese units closed in, 266 VC dead, 321 small arms, and 5,000 rounds of ammunition captured. That kind of haul told you they'd hit a real unit, not farmers with a few rifles. The answer was to add another dimension. If the boats couldn't seal every escape route, helicopters could. Part of the assault force would land by air in the VC's rear while the boats pushed in from the front. Helicopter assets were always short in the Delta because forces up north had higher priority. But when the division could get the birds, the combination was devastating. And then came Tet. January 31st, 1968. The VC and NVA hit everywhere simultaneously. The 9th Division was scattered across multiple fronts overnight. Units from the 1st Brigade, normally operating in the jungle north of Saigon, got pulled down into the Delta. Armored vehicles from 3-5 Cav helped crush an enemy uprising at Bien Hoa airfield. The 2nd and 3rd Brigades, men who'd been slogging through rice paddies for months, found themselves in street fighting at My Thought and Ben Tre, house to house, block by block, a kind of combat the Delta had never seen. The MRF became Westmoreland's Fire Brigade. Its ability to move fast on the rivers meant it could shift from one crisis to the next, while road-bound units sat stuck behind blown bridges and mined highways. During the first week of February, the MRF battled through Mai Tho Per Phao, then shifted to Vinh Nha Long, then back again. Westmoreland would later say the 9th Division and the mobile Riverine force saved the Delta from falling. Stop and think about what Tet did to the division's tactical education. Before Tet, the enemy had mostly fought as guerrillas, hitting and running, avoiding set-piece battles. Now they'd exposed themselves. Main Force VC and NVA regulars were out in the open, and for a few weeks, the 9th Division got to fight the kind of war its training had prepared it for. On May 2nd, near Dong Tam, elements of the 2nd Brigade collided with the 514th VC Battalion. The 3rd Battalion, 60th Infantry, and 347 encircled the enemy, while gunships and fighter bombers worked them over. The search of the Apbasi battlefield turned up 195 bodies. But the real lesson was what came after. Once the VC took their Tet losses, roughly 2,000 killed by the 9th Division alone during the offensive, they fragmented, broke into smaller and smaller groups, went back underground, and the division had to invent a whole new set of tactics to find them. This is where the real innovation happened. Under Major General Julian Ewell, who took command in February 1968, the 9th Division launched a systematic effort to develop, test, and refine techniques specifically designed for fighting a dispersed enemy in flooded terrain. Colonel Ira Hunt served as Ewell's chief of staff. Together they turned tactical development into something closer to an engineering problem: data collection, pattern analysis, measurable outcomes. They tracked everything: contacts per patrol, weapons captured per kill, booby trap incidents by type and location, time of day for enemy movement. They were trying to find the patterns in the chaos, and when they found one, they built a tactic around it. The jitterbug was the first major innovation, a daytime air-mobile technique adapted to the Delta's flat, flooded landscape. The concept used what they called a target detection package: light observation helicopters, Cobras, and people sniffers, airborne chemical sensors that detected traces of carbon and ammonia from human concentrations. The sniffers would fly over an area. When they got a hot reading, CS gas canisters were dropped to flush the VC from bunkers. LOHs went low, hovering just above the Nipa palm, to blow the vegetation around and spot movement. If a valid target was confirmed, the assault battalion got the call. The insertion was the key. Lieutenant Colonel Jim Lindsay's 2nd Battalion, 60th Infantry, became so skilled at jitterbugging that they could make 16 insertions in a single day, each one sweeping a suspected target before reloading and hitting the next. His successor, Lieutenant Colonel Fred Mahaffey, pushed insertions to within 100 meters of the target, sometimes as close as 15. No lift ships lost over a full year, despite operating that close. Over 90% of the battalion's contacts were over within 10 to 30 minutes. The VC called it Hawk tactics. A captured letter from VC Military Region 2 headquarters admitted the technique had been successful and warned subordinate regiments to exploit its weaknesses. Mainly the fact that operations ran from about 0900 to 1700, and that the Americans didn't use the tactic at night. So the 9th Division went to work at night. The Bushmaster and Checkerboard were ground-level nighttime techniques adapted from conventional doctrine. A Bushmaster put a company-sized element into a patrol base at night, breaking down into squad-sized ambush teams covering likely VC movement routes within artillery range. The Checkerboard expanded the concept, dispersing 10 to 12-man patrol units across a grid, 500 meters between each, mutually supporting, capable of covering an area 4 times larger than a Bushmaster. 15 slick loads of personnel could blanket an area 1.5 kilometers square. Both techniques worked as precursors to the pylon. Once a patrol made contact, other units converged to encircle and destroy. Artillery registered on call. Light fire teams on standby. The idea was to turn the VC's own tactic against them. They moved at night because they thought the Americans wouldn't. Now the Americans were sitting in the dark, waiting for them. And the encirclement drill, the SEAL, was something the 9th Division turned into an art form. Once a sizable contact developed, the brigade commander would throw every available asset into building a ring around the enemy force. Rifle companies inserted by helicopter to cut off escape routes. Artillery registered on the flanks. Concertina wires strung across canals from bank to bank. Hand grenades tossed into streams every 5 to 10 minutes to discourage swimmers from slipping through. CS gas dropped into the interior of the ring to flush VC from bunkers. Then Tiger Scouts, former VC who'd rallied to the government side, broadcast surrender appeals over loudspeakers. A few minutes of silence, then the artillery would resume. The point was to deny enemy commanders any ability to maneuver their units out of the kill zone. A gap of 20 meters in heavy cover was enough for a VC battalion to slip through after dark. The premium was on speed, get the ring closed before nightfall, then pound them until morning. It was a punishing way to fight, and it demanded courage from the grunts holding that thin perimeter all night, with nothing but listening posts behind them and enemy soldiers probing for a seam in the line. Then came the Night Hunter, which paired helicopter gunships with sniper teams flying in from a light fire team, and the Night Search, using searchlights with pink filters that preserve night vision while illuminating targets, and the Night Raid, a quick helicopter insertion on a target identified by sensors or intelligence in and out before the VC could react. The sniper program deserves its own attention because it changed the division's relationship with night operations entirely. Initiated after a visit to Fort Benning in January 1968, the program brought Major Willis Powell and 7 NCOs from the Army Marksmanship Unit to Vietnam in June. They built a 500-yard range at Dong Tam, retrained the division's marksmen, and modified 55 M14 rifles with sniper scopes. At first, the program went nowhere. The problem was organization. Snipers had been parceled out 2 per line company, and most company commanders didn't know what to do with them. Use them as regular riflemen. The fix was simple and immediate. Division directed the snipers be assigned to battalion headquarters instead, making battalion commanders responsible for their deployment. Once the BN commanders started attaching sniper teams to companies going out on night operations and letting the snipers pick their own positions, results came fast. The most creative employment came from 631, the 6th Battalion, 31st Infantry, operating from Riverine boats on the Mekong. Sniper pairs positioned themselves on the helicopter landing pads of Tango boats which drifted at 2 to 4 knots, 100 to 150 meters offshore. The boats would anchor for half an hour, then move to a new spot. As VC moved along the shoreline at night, the snipers waited for positive identification of a weapon, then fired. Between April 12th and May 9th, 1969, snipers from 631 killed 39 VC from those boats. The division's top sniper was Sergeant Adalbert Waldron, 109 confirmed kills. One afternoon, riding a Tango boat on the Mekong, an enemy sniper started peppering the craft from the shoreline, over 900 meters away. While everyone else on board was trying to locate the shooter, Waldron took up his rifle and dropped him out of the top of a coconut tree. One shot from a moving boat, 900 meters. And then there was the problem nobody talks about enough. Immersion foot. When your men are wading through water for days at a time, their feet rot. The skin breaks down, infection sets in, and you're losing soldiers to a medical condition that has nothing to do with the enemy. The 9th Division had to develop a whole program around foot care in terrain that was perpetually underwater. Rotation schedules, drying stations, treatment protocols. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept men in the field. The Safe Step program tackled booby traps with the same analytical approach. Instead of trying to teach every rifleman everything about mines and tripwired grenades, Division analyzed the problem and found that 2 types of devices and 3 or 4 setups covered the vast majority of incidents. By concentrating training on those specific configurations, they could teach most of what mattered without overwhelming the grunts. Men who showed a talent for detection got extra training and worked as on-the-job instructors. Statistical records tracked every incident, so commanders could identify patterns and adjust. 71% of booby traps incorporated grenades. Only 4% were detected by metal detectors. 41% were caught by visual detection alone, which meant training the human eye was the best defense. And there were the truly experimental solutions. The 39th Cavalry Platoon operated 3 specially designed hovercraft, air cushion vehicles, out of Dong Tam and later Ben Luc. These things could skim over water, mud, and open ground at speeds up to 60 knots, armed with 50 caliber machine guns, M60As, and a 40mm grenade launcher. They patrolled the plain of reeds along the Cambodian border, terrain so waterlogged that neither boats nor ground vehicles could cross it. Hovering above the muck, they could chase VC sampans and reach positions that no other platform in the division's inventory could get to. The 1st and 2nd Airboat platoons operated Hurricane Aircat airboats, fiberglass and foam craft that slid through canals too shallow for the Navy's armored boats. Vulnerable to RPG and small arms fire, miserable to ride in, but they went where nothing else could go. A typical airboat operation sent 8 boats up a canal to set a blocking position, then drove the enemy into it from the other direction. The 2nd Airboat platoon belonged to the 15th Engineer Battalion, and its men lived on sea rations and beer for 15 to 20 days at a stretch in the field. Their platoon sergeant was killed in one attack. That was the cost of operating the lightest, most exposed craft in the division's fleet. And it wasn't just hardware that was being tested. Leadership adapted too. In June 1968, Colonel Henry Emerson, the legendary gunfighter, took elements of the 1st Brigade into the Plain of Reeds, that vast flooded grassland along the Cambodian border, where the ground disappeared entirely underwater during the wet season. From June 1st through 4, his men tracked 2 VC battalions across terrain that should have made pursuit impossible. Artillery and airstrikes joined the chase. Over 225 VC killed in 4 days. Emerson understood that aggression had to be relentless in the Delta, that giving the VC time to regroup in sanctuaries like the Plain of Reeds or the Uamin Min Forest meant starting over from scratch. By the time the division launched Operation Speedy Express in December 1968, the accumulated tactical innovations were producing results at a scale the Delta had never seen. 8,000 infantrymen, 50 artillery pieces, 50 helicopters, and over 3,300 tactical airstrikes across the provinces of Kien Ho and Vinh Binh. The operation ran through May 1969. The official body count claimed nearly 11,000 VC killed, with fewer than 300 American dead. Those numbers carry weight that cuts more than one way. Fewer than 750 weapons were captured against that body count. The ratio troubled people then, and it troubles people now. Yule's own report acknowledged that in some areas of the Delta, the countryside resembled the Verdun battlefields. David Hackworth, commanding the 4th Battalion, 39th Infantry, the Hardcore Battalion, would later write about the pressure to produce kills. Chuck Hagel, a sergeant in the 9th Division who went on to become Secretary of Defense, spoke about body count, as the metric commanders lived and died by. But separate the controversy from the tactical record, and what you see is a division that arrived in the Delta with no doctrine for its environment, and within 2 years had invented an entirely new way of fighting. Jitterbug, Bushmaster, Checkerboard, Night Hunter, Night Search, Night Raid, Riverine combined arms, floating artillery barges, built at Cam Bay, carrying 2 105mm howitzers and 1,500 rounds each, towed into position by LCM-8s to deliver fire support from the water. Colonel Fulton called the Floating Artillery Battalion the single greatest contribution to riverine warfare by the MRF. The 9th Division's main units left Vietnam on August 27, 1969, the 1st Brigade to Hawaii, the 2nd Brigade to Fort Lewis. The 3rd Brigade stayed until October 1970, fighting into Cambodia before coming home. In total, elements of the division had served 1,440 days in country. When Westmoreland said the mobile Riverine force saved the Delta, he was saying something specific. Before the 9th Division arrived, the VC had moved through the upper Mekong, essentially unchallenged. No American unit operated there. The ARVN 7th Division was stretched too thin to hold it. By the time the old reliables left, the VC's grip on the northern Delta had been broken, their main force units shattered, their logistics disrupted. The division fought its way to that outcome by refusing to accept that the terrain was unworkable and by treating every failure as data. Sergeant Waldron came home with 2 Distinguished Service Crosses and 109 confirmed kills. He died in 1995 at age 62. His war ended decades before that, on a Tango boat drifting down the Mekong with a scoped M14 and the patience to wait for one clear shot.